Be another practice problem set about central banks. First, we're given that balance sheet again, the one we keep using, and it says, what's the money multiplier? Well, to do that, we have to know it's 1 over the required reserves, and so it's 1 over 0.2, so that's 5. And hopefully by this point we know that 0.2 comes from the 2,000 to the 10,000. Now suppose the Fed buys $5,000 worth of bonds. Calculate the maximum change in the money supply as a result of this purchase. So if they do that, then that 2,000 becomes 2, or that 7,000 becomes 2,000. And this 0 becomes 5,000. But the maximum change, well, this bank now has $5,000. It can loan out all 5,000. These dollars didn't occur. These 5,000 excess reserves just poof, they occurred. It wasn't because someone deposited the money. So we would say now if this bank loans out the 5,000 times 5 is $25,000. And that's including the original 5 because the original 5 were created out of thin air. It didn't happen from someone depositing the money. Now it says instead of the Fed purchase, what would be the maximum change if an individual had deposited 5? And why are these values different? Well, we've already actually solved that before. It's 20,000. And they're different because the 5K deposit already is in the money supply, So we can't double count it. Now, problem 2 says, assume that any money lent by a bank is deposited back as a checkable deposit. The reserve ratio is 10%. What's the money multiplier? 1 over 0.1 is 10. What's the maximum effect of a $10 million purchase of treasury bills? Now, bill is just a bond, right? That's a fancy way of saying that, by the Fed on the value of bank deposits. So 10 times 100, and this is a purchase, so it means that the Fed is buying bonds, so the money supply gets bigger. So it's 1,000 million, or $1 billion. If the Fed buys treasury, and that's an increase because they're buying bonds, so the money supply is bigger. If the Fed buys treasury bonds from a commercial bank, what happens to bank reserves and the money supply? Well, bank reserves go up and the money supply increases. So we'd say increase, B. When the Fed makes a loan to a commercial bank, it charges no interest, the prime rate, the discount rate. There it is. That's a quick test question. Do you remember what the discount rate was? The federal funds rate is the rate banks charge each other. Banks charge one another. That's the rate the banks charge the banks. So a lot of students will pick the federal funds rate, but it's actually that's not the rate the Fed charges when it makes a loan. So hopefully this helps you make sense of some of the problems related to central banks, and I'll see you next time.